Everybody knows, in a general way, that the finest place in the world is, or, alas, was, the Dutch borough of Vondervataymittis. Greetings, Poe fans. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeanie Smith.
And we are the Potastic 2. Welcome back, and it is season 3.
Woo-woo!
And today we are going to talk about Poe's literature for the literature degree. And what the topic is going to be is satire.
What was that? Satire?
Yes,
How
Jeanie.
can satire be?
Yes, Jeanie. What is the definition of satire?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. The noun definition, according to Oxford Languages, the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize people's stupidity or vices, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. Yes, satire.
Okay. That was a pretty long definition.
Yes, it was. They wanted you to make sure that it's mockery, ridicule, derision, all those wonderful things.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Oh, there's more than just that one definition under noun, but I thought that one covered a lot.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's a good definition. Well, we did some digging because, most people focus on Poe's horror. I think the next kind of in line is poetry, and then kind of goes into science fiction.
Right.
Even criticism. And satire for Poe kind of gets overlooked at times, don't you think, Jeanie?
It does. I mean, and the funny part is, I don't mean punny, I mean funny. The funny part is that Poe was very much using a lot of satire in most everything he wrote, whether it be poems, stories, novels, whatever. Even when he was criticizing, when he worked for the literature papers,
absolutely, and even in some of the horror stories, like Fall of the House of Usher, when he's using the word usher as a verb.
Exactly. So he was a true wordsmith in that aspect of it by creating a whole new genre, in my opinion, of satire.
Yeah, because it was definitely before Twain, and we're going to talk about that kind of stuff here in just a minute, because he was probably considered one of the the best humorists of English literature and that century.
Yes, I mean,
but
we're not getting into Mark Twain yet. We're still covering Poe.
Yes, we always get ahead of ourselves sometimes.
Well, it works.
But one interesting thing is the people during his time and after, the critics, the literati, if you will, people who are, Poe scholars and things like that. Many people they don't necessarily all think the same way of why Poe used satire as much as he did. One particular person, Roger Astlanu, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name right, and if I am mispronouncing, I apologize, but he was a scholar of American studies at the Sorbonne, and he felt like that Poe used humor to basically kind of deal with his own emotions and exercise his own demons, if you will.
Right. I mean, and we know, we've talked about this, Poe had a lot of demons.
Yes.
A lot of tragedy, a lot of things he needed to work through.
Right.
And what best way? And I mean, satire is one that you can use, and flattery, I guess, but in the worst parts of the flattery, because he wasn't really flattering these people when he was making fun of them, but he was mimicking or using them to make his own points.
Right. And, and he would also use it, very strongly in his criticisms. I think is kind of almost in a euphemistic way where it doesn't sound as harsh with the tomahawk as he was known.
Right.
As he could have just said it outright.
Yeah, and I'm gonna throw this out here, being a Southerner, that we use the term "bless your heart."
Yes,
which I've always put as being satirical.
Yeah.
Because, when you use the term bless your heart, if you're a Southerner, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes. Yes.
However, if you're not, if someone says bless your heart, just smile and just let it go.
Yes, exactly. And then kind of moving into the 20th century, in 1940, the poet Andre Breton also was putting together an anthology of dark humor, and he did include some of Poe's stories. But the one thing that he said about Poe was, he was the author of The Raven, but he was a drunkard, and it's like he was using humor in all these things. And so, Jeannie and I were talking about this before we started our episode today, that, he obviously was believing Griswold over digging deeper into Poe's true background by saying that.
And the thing about it is, poor Poe wasn't around to defend himself at this point.
Exactly.
And even when he was around, most of the time he could not defend himself to a certain degree because his actions in some instances with his alcoholism and there has been speculation that he was suffering from certain diseases that he had no control over that was controlling his behavior. So Poe didn't really have a defense. And so what Griswold was using was his own sort of...
Yeah, well, and the gossip.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To get what he wanted.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was to get back at Poe, but at the same time get rewarded for bashing poor Poe.
Exactly.
Or Poe.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's too much alliteration there. Okay.
Po, yes.
Okay.
Well, and a very great article that we found on eapo.org, written by Donald Barlow Stouffer in 1982. He talks about Poe using satire to fill his periodicals because, he couldn't just write horror all the time. He did have to kind of have a little bit of diversity with the writing. And one of the things that Stouffer said was, Poe was a multifaceted writer, and he had a talent for satire. He was brilliant as a wordsmith with wordplay, puns, irony, you name it, and alliteration too. I mean, just all of the English, figurative language devices that I love to teach.
Yes, I mean, he was a true wordsmith. We discussed this earlier. He used his knowledge. He used his, humor and horror to make points that he really wanted to zing at people.
Yeah.
And what better way to kind of comedically make fun of people and get what you want said to them than to make it into a pun or make it satirical or a parody or something like that, so you're not truly attacking that person libelly or slanderously.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I found in an article that was posted on the Poe Museum in 2016 called Poe the Punny Poet.
Love the alliteration.
Yeah, gotta love the alliteration. Was one of the things that not only did Poe write satire and make an attempt to make his readers laugh, but he also liked to throw out the occasional pun.
Yes.
So that was one of the things. It's like you have to be very good at what you do to make a pun work for you.
Yes, you do. And
I did not mean to rhyme. I just thought of that. Okay.
That's okay. And also with that, kind of tying in back to Stouffer's article, a lot of people felt like back then that he might have been only he was thinking when he was doing his satire, he was forgetting who all the magazines might have been going to.
Right.
And so a lot of people categorized his satire as more esoteric, meaning that it was just for a very small audience, more of the intellect, the literati and things like that. But T.H. White, after he submitted his Folio Club collection, he, through James Kirk Paulding, who was a friend of Poe, basically told him, you've got to write to a broader audience, so people will understand it and not think that he's writing over their heads.
Right. And Well, if you think about it, let's go to the historical aspects of what was
Okay.
going on at that time.
Right.
There was a Reformation happening in a lot of different arenas in
Yes.
that area, especially in the 1830s with the second, the Enlightenment period and all that, especially a reform where it came to schools and education.
Yes.
Because there was only a very small percentage, especially in the early American times, that were educated or allowed to be educated.
Yeah.
Because if you could pay, you got schooling. If you couldn't
Absolutely.
pay, you were working. So there was no time. And so illiteracy was rampant. And those
Yes.
people that were reading newspapers were only the literate. And Poe, and I have to say, he probably was a snob in certain ways because he was a well-educated, raised in a high-class society. So he had that. I mean, I'm not going to blame it completely that he was a snob. I'm just saying it was the time period and it was societal acceptance
Right.
of certain people who were educated and could read and understand those things. So, and one of the things also that it talked about was satire, especially in the early 1800s, was political.
Absolutely. And that's really where that started.
Exactly, it did. I mean, the 1824, the corrupt bargain happened, which lost Andrew Jackson the election and put somebody in office because, John Quincy Adams, JQ,
Yeah.
put him in office because he made a deal and got it. That was back before we had the real electoral college that we have nowadays.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
it's still not perfect.
Was
Nothing
it a
ever is
deal
perfect.
with the devil in the belfry?
Almost. Because it was. I mean, Henry Clay gave up, I think it was Henry Clay. One of them gave up
Yeah.
their electoral votes to John Quincy and pushed, and because he was actually in the House of Representatives.
Right.
So they voted to put John Q in office instead of Andrew Jackson. So, and then when Andrew Jackson ran again, he was not a very accepted president or nominee for things.
Right.
Because this is where political cartoons came into play.
I know.
Satire
Yes.
was main, and that's why Democrats are seen with the symbol of the donkey
Yes.
because of Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
The first political cartoon called Andrew Jackson an ass
Yes.
and gave him a donkey.
Yes.
And
It's very
he was
interesting.
loving and ran with it, and that's why the Democratic Party now has the donkey
Yes.
as its symbol
Well,
because of Andrew Jackson.
And
He was a
Jackson
Democrat.
had a pretty good sense of humor too. So.
Exactly, he was, but he was known as the people's president.
Yes.
For good reason.
Yeah.
He was uneducated. He was the first president who was elected who was taught how to read by his own wife while in office.
Exactly. Yes.
He was not educated by any means. But I digress from Andrew Jackson. We might
Yes.
discuss that. But I just wanted the
Yes,
historical
and
aspects of it to be known, the political satire.
Oh, no, I think that's really important here based on how much authors back then were using satire
and being influenced by the politics
yes,
of the time.
Absolutely. And some of Poe's tales include satirical figures that are politicians. And again, we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, on our future episodes,
Yes.
you will hear more about that.
Yes, so stay tuned.
Exactly.
But also, interestingly, in 1911, Poe's humor was really recognized by the Chicago Tribune, saying that it's impossible for any man to strike 12 at all times, basically referring to Poe's satire as, some stories are better than others, and one of the ones that that this particular editor was talking about was the system of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather and how it was a brilliantly done work that Poe did. And just thinking of the title alone.
Tar and Feather, because that we're going to go a little historical again, because you throw that back to the Sons of Liberty.
Yeah.
Because one of their overt actions was to tar and feather the tax collectors.
Right.
So, boom, just the title is throwing it into that satirical, political arena. Mm-hmm. And it just tar and feather, really, which was a horrible way of treating somebody.
There was also a prose writer that talked about, his name was N.P. Willis, and he talked about Poe and how he shaped the idea of his writing and the humor behind it. And so kind of in order of how Poe categorized this: imagination, fantasy, and humor. And that the humor is more mathematical. And so I was going to read a little blurb from this particular article because I thought it was extremely fascinating. Let's see. When proceeding a step farther, however, fantasy seeks not merely disproportionate but incongruous or antagonistical elements. The effect is rendered more pleasurable from its greater positiveness. There is a merry effort of truth to shake from her that which is no property of hers, and we laugh outright in recognizing humor. Thus, in attempting to relate humor to his theories about beauty and the imagination, Poe places humor at the lower end of the scale. He sees a connection between fantasy and the grotesque in his idea of the avoidance of proportion, and when to this incongruous is added, the result is humor. So it really, when you really think about it, Poe was a technical writer. Every word he used, every punctuation he used, he was very, very tedious and specific and very mathematical. So it all makes sense.
Point.
Yes, and purpose.
Yeah, exactly. He had a point in his writing.
Okay, all right. Well, all right, punny Jeanie.
Sorry, I just had to make that point.
No, again, there's the point. Oh my gosh.
We can blame Poe. Honey poet. Okay.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Anyway, but another thing that I wanted to bring up, speaking of that, the parody of a little force that was styled the Craven, called the Parrot.
Yes.
Was published in the Tomahawk, which was a satirical periodical of the time, on 19th of June in 1867. And from the Craven, who, need it be pointed out, was Napoleon III, the stanzas of the parody for The Parrot, which goes with The Raven, were published. And I mean, once again, we're going to go back to the forms of flattery. And we know, especially in music, we've had this happen. A lot of people have written parodies to different songs.
Yeah.
I mean, Weird Al Yankovic comes to mind.
Oh, he's the genius. Yes.
He is the genius behind the parody.
I would love to see a parody done by him of one of Poe's works.
Oh, he would knock it out of the park.
Oh, he would. That would be really cool. Weird Al, hopefully you're listening.
Or somebody that knows Weird Al, let him know.
Yes.
But that's the thing. It's just, you have to have that type of writing, but you have to be good at it.
Yes.
That was the point that I was trying to, I mean, yes, I've read The Parrot, which I would, urge other people. It is a parody of The Raven, and it's done very well.
Yes.
In my opinion. But most things, you have to be good at writing. You have to understand the language. You have to understand the satire. You have to understand the literary elements before you're able to pull it off.
I agree.
So, and Poe that's his genius, in my opinion, was his ability to push and pull all of these literary elements into one.
Oh, yeah.
And he made his readers know that, and they accepted that. I mean, we've talked about this before, how Poe always leaves open in his stories for the reader to put their own spin on things.
Yeah, their interpretation, their perspective, and relate it to their own personal lives.
Exactly, whether it be with satire, whether it be with just regular poetry or whatever.
Yeah.
It was meant to make something happen.
I agree. I totally agree. And, Poe used it, like we mentioned before, not just as a satirical story, but he used it in all of his works. And, some of the things, like for some of his poems, O Tempora, O Moors is one he uses satire in. Fairyland, To the River, and this was actually influenced by Byron. There's some links there. and then Epigram for Wall Street. It's, from what I could tell, it alluded to that Poe did write it, this was in the Evening Mirror in 1845, but his name was not signed for this, but it was Poe's, style, words and everything. He also wrote many satirical stories, and we'll kind of list the top 10. We found a really nice article that someone had talked about the top 10. The Man That Was Used Up. And we don't want to give away too much, but there's a bombastic general and a narrator, and very clever story. The Spectacles, and we will not share too much about that because it takes place in an opera at the beginning and a marriage, and then the reveal.
Exactly. And I mean, it works. One of the things with Poe that I've learned is that his story titles are very much a part and parcel to seeing what's being written. And yes, pun was definitely intended with spectacles.
Oh, yeah. The Angel of the Odd.
Which is really odd.
Yes.
Really odd.
Oh, and again, we don't want to give too much away. The Duke de la Omelette, which is just the name itself is just, makes you think, should I be reading this during breakfast?
Well, I mean, think about it. He was not only using that title to premise his story, but think about the nursery rhymes of the times that came out.
Humpty Dumpty. Yes.
I mean, that was perfect. He was using the political side of it because Humpty Dumpty was all about the historical aspects of all the king's men, about how they failed to, win. Good Lord, I'm starting to rhyme. Keep going.
All right. And then Bonbon. And there's some French elements there, and
Food, French,
yes,
of course.
Absolutely. The Devil in the Belfry, and the quote that I read at the very beginning comes from this story. And if you hadn't noticed, the name of the city or the borough that it takes place, it's I Wonder What I Missed is basically what it sounds like. And hopefully you caught that. Some Words with a Mummy, which we have read on Poe Unplugged. We're not going to digress on this one because that is not one of Jeannie's favorites, and we're going to just move on.
Yes, if you've
for that
seen
reason.
the video, you will hear all about why I don't like that, but okay.
And then Never Bet the Devil Your Head. This is a great story, and we are actually reading that on Poe Unplugged at the end of the month. So please sign up and join in the fun. But this one, we're going to talk about on Poe Unplugged more than just the story itself, but some ties to it. But it was published in 1841, and there's some similarities in the story to another little story published in 1820. And I'm not going to give away the author or the name, but just go check that out. You probably read between the lines.
Yeah, you can figure it yourself once you read it.
Oh, yes. And then the Sphinx. And this is, to me, it's got some very surrealistic elements in this story. A little bit of horror as well. But a man is fleeing from some things and stays with someone on the Hudson River and sees something coming. And it's just, it's a little bit horrific, but surrealistic. I mean, it's got lots of elements. And then one of my favorite titles, The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather. And so it's a great tale and highly recommend it. So I recommend everything, but except Jeannie will not recommend Some Words with a Mummy.
No, I will not. Sorry.
But when you boil down just the top 10, and there's so many others that have that, the sarcasm in there, the satire. But when you kind of nail down and kind of look at trends in these particular works, these 10, you've got themes of the devil, which goes back to religion And, Jeannie, do you have
Yes.
anything you want to add on that?
Well, as we've discussed, especially in Poe Unplugged people, if you've watched them or been a participant, you heard how I always point out that Poe has this religious entanglement in his stories. And most of the time, it's not a good entanglement, and he brings all aspects, not just one particular religion, but he brings out something to do with religion in everything that he writes. You just have to pay attention. And in my opinion, this is another way that he is, thumbing his nose at religion and things that are happening at the time. And like I said, during this time period, we're going through another great awakening, an enlightenment, a reformation period during his writing. So it does not surprise me that he has that satirical aspect towards religion in what he writes.
Absolutely. Some other kind of themes are bombastic and arrogant characters, which kind of ties to the political themes of the times and people that Poe just disagreed with in general.
Or disliked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of them.
Yeah. And then a lot of his humor had an element of darkness. And one of these stories in particular, I think most people will like it, but it definitely has a dark edge to it, kind of leaning towards horrific, but it's definitely humorous.
Yeah, so. And that, in my opinion, that is the epitome of satire.
Yeah.
Is having that, or dark humor type.
Yeah.
Which I happen to be a fan of.
Oh, me
humor.
too. I like it too.
People look at me kind of weird sometimes.
Oh,
but,
but
that's all right.
They do that anyway, and me too.
Exactly.
Yeah, we look at each other weirdly, I should say.
It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to use my adverb, not adjective.
Exactly.
And then also just double meanings, puns, and just, again, wordplay. He was a master at it. One of the best.
Yep.
Absolutely one of the best.
And he was constantly learning and trying to learn and trying to adapt to things. There was one part where someone put an excerpt of one of his old classmates had written a little bit of a couple sentences saying that he would always find Poe sitting around, but not with verses of long times, but just with ideas. And he would ask him for help on ideas, asking about, well, do you think this would rhyme with this? Or what do you think of that? So Poe was always wanting to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And using other people to bounce his ideas off of. Brainstorming is one of the big aspects of anything that you do.
Oh, absolutely. And we do it all the time.
Yeah,
all the time.
You have, and that tells me in one aspect that Poe does pay attention to his audience.
Yes.
And he wasn't a complete snob of just writing to certain masses.
Yeah.
But he did take in consideration that aspect of it.
Well,
but he was also a realist, in my opinion.
Yeah. But in a kind of a dreamer, he's definitely left, right brain, but he's both.
Oh, yes.
Definitely both.
Especially with his mathematics scores. We've talked about this when we did the Pale Blue Eye. That was one of his highest scores while he was at West Point, and his other degree, education was math. Yeah,
and, he also, kind of with what you're saying with, paying attention to the audience and, being kind of a lifelong learner, he also, when you think about teaching, I don't know how much of this was resonated back then, but I know now this is one of the things that, we hear all the time. You raise the bar and you have them meet you at the bar or go above the bar. And so I think in a way, he might have not just thought about, okay, I'm only going to write for people that are intelligent, but he wanted everyone to read his work and go to that bar.
Yeah.
Not bars to drink, bars of intelligence.
Exactly.
Throwing in a little punniness.
Oh, yes.
But also, he, and kind of too with Jeannie, what you said with his adaptation, he also, some of his satire kind of at the beginning when he was younger was a little bit on the, I hate to say mean guy side, but, or like, you could say cruel, but I hate to use that harsh of a word, but some of it was. But then as he got older, it was not as harsh. It
Right.
it evolved with him as a man gaining wisdom.
Yes, and that could also go back to life lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Could also have some aspect of his own illnesses coming out, his
Right.
alcoholism and other things.
Mm-hmm.
But as we've seen, many of us, we change in certain ways over the years. We adapt to ideas and to outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to humor, because as anyone knows that some humor has changed about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable.
Right.
And I hate using this term, but political correctness.
Yeah, well, and some of his stories, because of the times, and this is the one thing we always say, and I even tell my students this all the time: read it in the context of when
Yes.
it was written. When is the key?
Yeah.
It doesn't make it right, but that was the times, and now we know better.
Exactly. That's why that when some comedians, I will not say who they are, but in the past 25, 30 years, some comedians that were extremely successful
Right.
were successful for the wrong reasons, in my opinion.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why I was never a follower of that type of humor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love satire, I love puns, I
Yeah.
love parodies, but humor, even dark humor, is not meant to be derogatory.
Mm-hmm.
It's not meant to be hurtful.
Or put down someone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be that way.
Yeah.
And that's why, my students always ask me, Miss Smith, have you watched this movie or have you seen this movie? And I'm like, no. Why would I want? That's like I hated Three Stooges.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, it was a body comical.
Yeah.
It just wasn't my type of comedy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if our audience has picked up. You're very specific on the humor you like, and we haven't talked about humor as much.
No.
I
This is
probably
the
like a
first
little
time
bit
we've-
more
yeah.
than you do. Yeah.
Yeah, we've just hit upon it somewhat. And I always tell them, it's like, why do I need to watch those shows when all I have to do is come to work?
Yes.
And they're like, what? I'm like, I've watched many children that would just, run into walls and bounce off. Mm-hmm. And it'd be like, I wasn't going to laugh at that, but it's like, you deserved it because you weren't watching where you're going.
Right.
So why would I need to watch a television show or a video or a movie?
Yeah.
Where that's just, I call it stupid humor.
Yeah.
But,
and that's okay.
And it's
That's
not
okay.
because the person is stupid; it's because they've done something that was stupid.
Yeah, and a lot of people like stupid humor,
And there's
that's
nothing
okay.
wrong with that.
That's right. That's
Everybody
right.
has their own things. That's just
Right.
not mine.
Yeah, and I mean, and also kind of talking with the whole context as well. That's why you should not ban things, and you should read to learn from it.
Exactly. A lot of the problem is that there's nobody to explain that to people,
Right.
especially young kids, about what you're reading
Yeah.
and why just letting it out there for somebody is not how this is supposed to go.
Right. Exactly.
You need to have an understanding about what you're reading, the whole full picture.
Background knowledge.
Exactly, because if you just there's two sides to every story.
Absolutely.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
That means there's two sides to everything. And Poe was a very much, in my opinion, a type of writer who allowed his readers to get both sides of the story.
Yes. Yes.
Not only how he's perceiving it, but how the reader's perceiving it, along with what's going on in the time period of that time.
Yeah, definitely. One of the articles that I read, I thought this was really interesting, kind of looking more towards, it was like a review of Bon Bon and Duke de la Omelette. Gothic becomes burlesque when you think of satire. Gothic becomes burlesque, sci-fi becomes hoax, and satire becomes parody.
Yep.
And I thought that was just a really nice way to categorize when you look at, and to me, this tied to our degrees.
Right.
And I just thought that was a very nice way to say it. But then I also wrote myself a note. Can we really classify sometimes?
No, we can't. And that's also one of the things that we go back to the very beginnings of literature, of the written word. I mean, some people still don't know that Shakespeare has created some words that we use on a daily basis that weren't even in existence. He created them.
Oh, absolutely.
Which-
and I don't remember which story it is that Poe has, and it's a satirical one because it was mentioned in one of the articles.
Yes.
But he's listing all of these phrases by Shakespeare because I don't know if you know this, listeners, but Poe was not a big fan of Shakespeare.
Nope. He wasn't. And that's another thing. Just because he didn't like somebody, it doesn't mean that he didn't pay homage to them in
And
some
respect
sort.
the writing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He may not like them, but he did respect them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because he himself knew how much and how difficult writing could be,
Exactly.
especially in that day and age. Now, why he totally had an issue with Shakespeare, who knows?
Yes.
Not like he ever met the man, didn't know the man. It was just one of those things.
Unless he time traveled.
True, and it's possible. I actually I read an article where someone actually postulates that Poe is a time travel.
Oh, yeah.
And we've talked about this before.
Oh, yeah. And we will not digress. That will be a future episode.
Yes, Poe may meet us there.
I hope so. I hope so.
But it goes all the way back to using the literary elements and knowing how to do that well. So whether Shakespeare was a fan, whether Poe was a fan of Shakespeare, did not matter. He did pay respect to what he did for a living.
Yes.
Knowing that he was contributing to language and literature.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I do agree Poe did very well. He may not like you, but even in his critiques, he would be very critical.
Yes.
But he would show the trueness of the respect of what you were trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's what a lot of artists need to pay attention to.
Right. And constructive criticism is very good feedback, and it's only trying to make you better.
Yes, criticism is not meant just to tear you down,
right,
and not help you rebuild. Criticism is meant to be constructive.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows if you try to put up a wall and all of a sudden there's not the right number of bricks or something is off or the foundation is crooked.
Right.
Just tearing down that wall doesn't fix the problem.
Exactly.
So you have to be constructive with your criticism.
Oh, yeah.
So if you have a problem with something, or like literature or anything, even when Poe was criticizing.
Right.
He was very, very overt and very detailed in what the criticism was.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
Whether it be in parody or satire.
Yeah. Poe also had some influence on future people. This is an author that I really have not read, and this is one I've got to check out. And actually, the Creature Preachers mentioned this particular author, Ambrose Bierce. And Poe definitely influenced Bierce in horror, science, and satire. Didn't get to dig a lot into it, but again, what we like to do with our degree episodes is kind of do the overview and then talk about specific people later. And so that's probably one
future episodes
we'll actually talk about. And then another one, I found a really interesting article of William Carlos Williams said this of Poe and Mark Twain. And he said that basically there's such a likeness between the two. And, Twain was, I think, a teen when Poe died. I think young teen when Poe died.
Teen because it was after the Civil War
when
Twain started getting his recognition.
Yeah. And that, there was an affinity of likeness between them. And it was really interesting because some of the things that this article mentioned was like thinking about some of the stories that Twain wrote involving like adventures and sea type adventures, related to Arthur Gordon Pym or the Gold Bug and things like that. And just the whole element of satire. It's like there was no definitive place in the article that Twain said, yes, Poe was influenced by me. He did write a few things about Poe that were kind of contradictory. It was like, his words are this, his words are that, but yet he was a genius. And then one of the other things that they mentioned in the article was that there were no books from when he was younger to show did he like Poe when he was growing up. But then I think there was a biography, one of the biographies of Poe that was in his library when Twain died.
Right.
And so I've actually visited his house up in Connecticut, and beautiful home, beautiful grounds. And so I kind of want to go back and look and see what, because they had his library. You couldn't get up really close and personal, but I'd like to ask some of those questions to somebody that was more of a Twain scholar.
True. And the way I view it is that Twain felt towards Poe as Poe felt towards Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Twain may have had some, here and there during the time period of hearing about Poe and being somewhat influenced by Poe.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he never truly used Poe for his writing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I love most about Twain, like you said, was his satirical writings.
Absolutely.
Even his pseudonym that he wrote under, in my opinion, was a satire.
Oh, absolutely. And a pun, really.
Because he took his name based on what he did as a child and what he did for a living.
Yes.
And it's like, what if he had written under the name Samuel Clemens? Would it have come across as the same as him being a Mark Twain?
Exactly. I know.
Oh, and he,
it's like gives me chills about it.
The story that he wrote about a frog.
Yes.
And then you tie that back to Poe's frog.
Yes.
So, you can't help, especially in that time.
There's a lot of things that are definitely
a tie-in.
Yes, and similar.
Yeah, but you can't help but have those influences in your life.
Yeah.
No matter whether you truly are a fan or not.
Right.
If you are in that genre or if you are that type of artist or something, there's going to be influences somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. And it may even be subliminal and you don't even realize it. And, maybe till late in life, or you may never realize it. Other people may pick up on those things just like I felt like the person that wrote that article did.
Yeah, and it's like we were talking yesterday with someone who you will find out if you follow our YouTube, that most of Poe and some other major artists never really got to get that infamy.
Yeah.
They always got it posthumously.
Yes.
So they don't know unless they're still hanging around in spirit, or a ghost was.
Right.
They never know how much they're influencing everything else.
Yeah.
Or how much power they actually wielded in that area. Whether it be literature, sculpture, painting, whatever.
Yeah.
So you just have to take in that consideration.
Yeah.
That you never know. Somebody who could have just said something to you one day could have influenced you and you never knew it.
I know. It's amazing. And when you are writing something, painting something, whatever it is, and you do kind of realize some connection you had from previously as a child or whatever, it's very surreal to realize, wow, that person really made a difference. And okay, I'm going to bring this in to my freshman English teacher that I had many years ago. Yeah.
I won't go into how many. But anyway, he was truly an influence on me, but at the time that I was in his class, I couldn't stand him.
Yeah.
I was one of those students, and I know to this day because I would always tell my kids they would try to get away with murder, and I'd be like, no. And they're like, how did you know that? Well, because I tried it when I was your age, way back in the day, and it didn't work for me then. It's not going to work for you now.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until after I was grown and after I had got my teaching degree and became a teacher myself that I realized the influence that he had on me in literature because he was the reason I sought out literature.
Yeah.
as what my main focus was going to be. And when I met him one day and he asked me what I was doing, and I told him I was a literature teacher, he looked at me and he said, "It's about time you figured out what you were supposed to be doing."
Right.
And I'm like, "Oh, well, okay, I'll give you that. I'll give you that." Because I don't ever remember not reading.
I'm the same way. I don't ever... there's never a time I can remember like learning. It was there. Yeah.
Exactly. And another thing with that is I grew up in a family where education was not seen as anything other than just a means to the end.
Yeah.
Or a necessity.
Right.
Because I had one uncle had a 3rd grade education. He dropped out because he had to go to work. My own father only went to 8th grade because he got sick and couldn't continue. And then after he got better, he just stayed at home and worked.
Yeah.
So education was not that of an epitome in my clan, basically.
Yeah, I had a few influences, and like the first one was my father, and I remember my mother and our neighbor had coffee every afternoon, either at our house or her house. And sometimes when my father would get home early, he'd join them, and occasionally I would sit at the table,
Yep.
And I remember, I forget what the conversation was totally about, but my father, we were talking something about things I wanted to do. And he said, Miss such and such, and a family friend, "Oh yeah, she's an English teacher. And you remind me of her, and I can see you being an English teacher."
Yeah.
And that always resonated with me, where I was like, he's right.
Yeah.
And that's when I'm back to doing, and I'm just back in love with what I do. It's amazing. And then, with my own writing, because I've been writing stories since I was probably 7 years old. I can remember in the 4th grade, Miss Deripaska, I know her name changed when I was in the 6th grade, because I had her again in 6th grade. Her name was Miss Thompson. But she allowed me to take one of my stories and show it to the class. My dad made this little kind of picture box where you turn a rod, and, the pictures that I drew for it. And then we had a contest where the students wrote the end, and I got to judge who got the best ending. And so that was exciting, but that stuck with me. And then my teacher, my junior and senior English teacher, she would give me feedback on my stories, and she's like, "Don't give up." She goes, "You've got so much potential." And then she went on to teach college later. Cool. So Jeannie, I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. O'Neill, and if he happens to be listening, he should know that he was a big influence, and I apologize for the grief that I gave him, because I swear I was not a troublesome student, but I was not actually a little quiet flower on the wall either. Being teachers, we love those kinds of students because they always involved. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah.
So Poe being an influence is one of the things that I love, because reading is my life and has been my life from the very beginning. And I'm like you, I've been writing, I've been drawing since I was able to pick up a pen.
Absolutely.
Or a pencil.
Yeah, we have that in common.
Or any of that. So it needs to be known.
Yeah.
That you can accomplish things, and people can touch your life without you ever knowing.
Yes. Or
but you figure it out later down the road.
Absolutely. So don't give up on your dreams.
Exactly. Never give up on dreams.
That dream within a dream.
Yes.
Keep it at the forefront of your mind.
And even though Poe never actually got to live his dreams of knowing that he was as popular a poet and writer as he truly sought out to be. Yeah. He, I hope, knows now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether he's time traveling or not. So.
Well, I know we digressed a little bit, but I think it all ties in, and
it works because that's what Poe does.
That's right. He brings people together.
Exactly, whether they want to or not.
All right. So for this episode,
yes, we are
Poe out.
I To a contemplative understanding such as I myself possess, it seems evident at once that the marvelous increase of late in these odd accidents is by far the oddest accident of all. For my own part, I intend to believe nothing henceforward that has anything of the singular about it.